Hey guys, I hope you're doing well. Today I want to show you how to get warmer, fuller sounding mixes with more volume and more presence, and you can do it today for free at home. Now, I got to tell you, I'm a huge fan of the digital world. I love my DAW. There are a lot of free ones out there. All of them are great. They make it really convenient and easy that we can record at home with very little equipment, with very little money, and we can create professional sounding mixes, and each and every one of us can do this ourselves, and we don't have to go spend thousands of dollars at the studio to create the music that's inside of us. But that comes with a price. In the old days, I grew up using the 4-track recorder where you would, record on a tape and then go over it and over and over it. And this was fun, and it was a great learning experience. The digital world makes it so much easier. You can cut, you can splice, you can copy, you can paste, you can throw plugins on there. But we did lose something when we went to the digital world. Our ears like the sound of analog equipment. It likes the sound of what we call saturation. Now, this is not an infomercial. If you want to know more about saturation, let me know in the comments. I'll be glad, to do a video specifically on what saturation is and how it works. But the basics of it is that saturation is the distortion and the harmonics you would get from running through analog gear. Now, I'm a huge fan of analog gear. I don't own a whole lot of it. It's really expensive and it takes up a whole lot of space. If you own some, that's great. Let me know in the comments what you own and what you think people should have as far as analog gear goes. But for most of us, analog is not an option. We're stuck in the digital world. Luckily, though, we can get that analog sound through plugins that we call saturation. So it's basically just analog distortion. And now we're going to jump in here to a little project I've got from a local artist, and I'm going to show you what some saturation plugins can do. I am not sponsored by anybody, so all of these saturation plugins are just, ones that I've found that I tend to like. If you've got a saturation plugin that you like, that you think I should check out or everybody else should check out, drop it in the comments because I want to know about it. I want to use it. So let's jump in here. I've got a track here, like I said, by a local artist. And here's what it sounds like, just kind of rough mixed. All right, so this sounds pretty good, and I don't really have saturation plugins on here yet. It does sound good, but the problem is when you go straight in digitally, things can begin sounding like thin or brittle or weak, and they don't cut through the mix. They don't have the presence that you're expecting or that you're used to hearing, and that's why saturation plugins can be handy. Now, here I've got this track right here is a snare track. The only thing I've got on it at the moment is compression. And as we play it, you'll hear this snare track. It cuts through the mix nicely, but the problem is to me, it's peaking too high. What happens if something is, is turned up really loud so that, it cuts through the mix? When you get to the mastering stage, you're going to have all of this volume. You're not going to be able to, get it super loud when you've got all these peaks jumping through, because in the mastering process, the limiter is going to want to stop the music from reaching a certain level. So saturation can come in handy for several reasons. Here is a great example. On this snare, I want to bring the volume down, but bring the perceived volume up. I know that sounds strange. Saturation can do amazing things. I'm going to show you right here. On this snare track, we're just going to go grab a free saturation plugin. Here's one that I like to use on snare every now and again. This is Shattered Glass. I'll leave the link in the description below. And just sort of right out of the box, here's what it's doing, to that snare track. So let me jump into the song here. All right, now you've noticed it's brought, I'm going to toggle this off, I'll play it again. On. You can see that it brought the perceived volume up. We really haven't added any actual volume, but the saturation plugin in itself is bringing the perceived volume up. Now, one of the things you can do here with Shattered Glass, you can play around with these. You know, the snare I like to sort of pierce through, not on the low end like, you know, with the kick and stuff, but, you know, I generally raise the treble a little bit. This gain is going to be how much distortion you get. I'm not going to add an awful lot of distortion to this snare, just a little bit. And then I can turn the output actually down so that we're actually dropping the volume of the snare. And I'll leave this at 0 for the moment. I'm gonna play it and drop this output to where it sits nicely in the song. And you're gonna see that we're actually lowering the volume, but the snare is going to sound like it's still loud and clear in the mix. So here we go. See, that's way too loud now. And I've dropped that output way down. And so we've brought the volume of the snare down, but the actual perceived volume, the way you perceive saturation with that distortion and the harmonics it adds, it actually still sounds like it's loud and present, even though we've brought it down. Now, if one of the problems you'll have with a snare drum, if you leave the snare drum with no saturation on it, what you'll get is these peaks. You know, when you go to mix it down, you'll see these peaks. Some people call them fishtails, whatever you want to call them. When the snare drum hits, it like peaks outside of everything else, which means it's way louder than everything else, and you're not going to get sort of a smooth, even finish on your mix. So saturation on the snare drum can certainly help. This track next to it is the kick. Once again, I've only got a compressor on here. We're going to go find another saturation plugin. The one plugin that's really helpful when it comes to things like the entire drum set or maybe the kick is a free plugin. It's called Saturation Knob. You can use Saturation Knob on all sorts of different tracks. Try these around. I'm going to just throw, let's say, this drum distortion on here. I probably don't want that much saturation. Remember though, when you're using this particular plugin, you'll see this line over here on the right. You see how we've got that yellow line way up here? You're going to have to push set in order to bring it back down to the volume that it was. So I'm going to push set over here, and it will adjust it. And we have increased the perceived loudness of the kick as well. So the kick's now punching through, the snare's now punching through, and all we've done is add, a simple free saturation plug-in. Over here on the main bus, you can also try a saturation knob. It's got a setting for light mix bus distortion, and it actually adds saturation to the entire track. And it does a really good job. I'm going to show you another saturation plugin that's kind of a mix between saturation plugin and like a compressor, like almost like a multi-band compressor, and that's RBASS. RBASS is not free. Like I said, I do not get sponsored by anybody. This is a Waves plugin. I think it's around $30. It is worth picking up if you haven't tried RBASS yet. It really does add some presence. So if you've watched one of my previous videos on low end, you'll know I've got 3 bass tracks. This was just a bass DI, so we just went straight into the computer with this bass. There was no amp, no anything like that. I've got one track that just has the low end coming through. I've got another track that just has the high end coming through. And then I've got another track where I've added sort of an amp modeler to it with distortion and just kind of brought that underneath. This track is the bus track. So I've got all 3 of those tracks going to this one, and it creates just one bass guitar. I'm going to turn this RBASS off. We can listen to the bass. Turn it on. And what you'll notice on and off, especially if you put headphones on or you're listening to this in the car, you can really tell a difference. When you add that R bass, it all of a sudden adds so much thickness and warmth and depth to that bass guitar. You do have to be careful with R bass. It can get overwhelming, and you can go overboard really quickly with it. So use it in moderation would be my suggestion to you. But do try it out. Every now and again, they do give this plugin away for free. So if you see it for free, like on Cyber Monday or something like that, it is definitely worth picking up. It's probably worth $30. It was to me to get it. But like I said, I'm not sponsored by Waves. You use whatever plugins you want. If you own Ozone, which Ozone is a mastering software, Ozone comes with some distortion plugins as well. So I'm just going to take these off real quick. I'm going to turn Soothe off, which Soothe deserves its own its own video, because Soothe is a awesome piece of software. But here we've got a distortion plugin, a saturation plugin by Ozone, and it's called Vintage Tape. So basically what these saturation plugins are, a lot of times you'll see them called tape emulators, or tape simulation, something like that. And it replicates the idea of running through analog gear. Ozone comes with a lot of presets, added articulation. Clean 15 would be the 15 tapes. And you can adjust the tape speed, whether it be 7.5, 15, or 30. You can adjust on all of these the input drive, the harmonics that you get. One of the things that saturation does, not only does it add distortion, but it also will add harmonics around it, which is why it ends up sounding fuller when you add saturation. I'm going to show you a free saturation plugin. We'll just go back to this snare, for example. We'll take this one off. Another free saturation plugin that you can get is this Klanghelm here. So I'll put the link in the description to this one as well. But this Klanghelm is a really transparent, more of a clean sounding saturation. It's not overbearing. It's really subtle. So it works well. I mean, it works well on anything, but where I primarily use it is, say, vocals or acoustic guitars, electric guitars, something where I don't want it an overbearing amount of distortion, but I do want some. One thing to keep in mind if you use a saturation plugin like this, or a lot of times analog emulation gear, things that are trying to emulate analog gear, it'll have a trim knob, and basically in order for the plugin to kick in and start doing what it is meant to do, you have to get the volume at a certain level. So just turning it, just throwing the plugin on there doesn't always work. This is a good example. I'm just going to solo this snare here, and you're going to see that right here we're not getting up here around 0 where we're supposed to. Remember that this is an analog distortion. That's what saturation is. And distortion happens when you turn, think of like a guitar amp. You turn the gain up and it sort of overdrives that signal. Now, overdriving a signal in the digital world sounds absolutely terrible, but overdriving a signal in the analog world sounds wonderful. So what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to trim or get this signal up here so that that distortion, that overdrive can start kicking in. So we'll have to turn the trim up. If you notice, though, as we turn the trim up, that is turning the volume up. So you are now turning the gain on that up. So that means in order to compensate, you're going to have to turn this output down, because we're cranking the volume up so that it can be overdriven, but we've got to compensate by turning the output down. So now we've had to turn the output down, and then we can go in and we can turn the distortion or the drive up. So that's one thing to keep in mind when you're using this analog gear or this analog emulation gear and these saturation plugins is sometimes they do have a trim button, and you need to get that volume up to a certain level in order for it to kick in and start working the way that it's supposed to. Do you start using saturation plugins? Just take a semi-transparent one like this Klanghelm, or use the saturation knob within moderation, and start putting them. Put them on all the tracks. Put them on some of the tracks. It really will add some depth, some thickness to your tracks. It will also add presence. So on things you really want to stick through, like your kick, your snare, lead guitar, vocals especially, they need saturation on there. They need that analog warmth that you get. And this adds overall warmth to your track and will make your track sound warmer, like the radio quality studio, professional studio produced songs that we're used to hearing. It's what they're doing. This is how they're getting that warmth, is by adding these saturation plugins. So do try it. If there's a saturation plugin that you want me to try, throw it in the comments. I would be glad to try it. If y'all need anything else, reach out to me. I'll be glad to help you.